Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and perhaps good evening to some people who are connected online. For those in the room, I hope this will, the usual post-lunch session tends to be a bit hard, but we will try to be, I think, keep you focused and interested through what I hope will be a very frank conversation. Before I just get into the substance of what we will be discussing and the distinguished introduce the distinguished set of panelists that we have, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules. First, on translation. Um, well, we're still waiting for Minister Vala from Mozambique. He had gone off to see off His Excellency President Chapo, so he may be a bit delayed coming back, but he will be speaking Portuguese. So unless you speak Portuguese, please get yourself some headphones. We will have simultaneous translation. And for those online, you will see the instructions there as well for simultaneous translation. Second, we will have a Q&A session at the end, towards the end of the session. Please, if you're online, pose a question in the chat. If you're in the room, just raise your hand. The key thing is I will try to be very disciplined. No, not try. I will be very disciplined in making sure that you keep your questions short and succinct so we can hear from the panelists. Third, if you're on social media and wish to share anything, please use the hashtag Fragility Forum. So turning now to what we will be discussing in this session. Let me begin with what might seem like an obvious point. At least it was to us as we were working on the, I should have introduced myself at first. My name is Shubham Chaudhary. I'm the World Bank's Director for the Fragility, Conflict, and Violence Department, a name that I've wished were different, but it's called the FCV department. I've been in this role for about a year and a half. Before that, I was in Nigeria as the World Bank Country Director for 5 years. Before that, in Afghanistan as the country director there for 3 years. So the FCV agenda is one that's very close to my heart. And so we have been very involved working with a very large group across the World Bank group, thinking about what we need to do differently going forward, okay, in terms of how we engage in these FCV settings. You may have heard from Ajay this morning that our financing has gone up to now almost $30 billion that goes to countries affected by FCV. That represents over 50% of the financing that we concessional financing that we provide every year. So in that sense, FCV is no longer kind of a niche or fringe issue. It's central to what we do everywhere. At the same time, we recognize that we have to step up. We have to do things differently. And that's what this strategy is about. Which brings me to the basic point, what would be an obvious point, which is that it cannot just be about the money. Development finance by itself is not going to bring about the kind of lasting impact that we would all hope for, okay, unless certain other things go along with it. The one that we will focus on in this session is the leadership and commitment of the government partners or the political elites in the countries where we're working. We come in as international partners. Ultimately, sustainable kind of impact comes from the people and the political leaders taking charge. I think Carl Scow said it this morning. We're in the business of making ourselves redundant, we being the international partners. And for us to be redundant, government, political leadership has to step up. So that's the fundamental point that we will be focusing on as part of our refresh strategy. What we've said is we are going to calibrate our programs, our engagement, especially in terms of the financing, to where there is that government commitment. Okay, again, may seem obvious to some of you, and for some of you, it may seem like something that we're doing radically different, because too often in the past, we've also been pulled by the moral and political imperatives of going where there is need. Okay, and that tension will always be there between the short term or the immediate, very human kind of suffering that one sees and kind of rushing in to help, versus the longer term of how can we help in a way that actually is sustainable, will last, so that we break out of this cycle of fragility, conflict, and violence. That's the fundamental trade-off that I hope that we will hear from all our panelists, that we'll think about. There's no correct one answer to it, and there are pros and cons of this. I hope we can tease that out. What we're going to do is in 2 rounds. In the first round, I'm basically going to ask the panelists about how they think about this trade-off between meeting the immediate imperatives of meeting basic needs, relieving human suffering. Okay, so think of it as a needs-based approach to development financing. The second round will be on, look, there doesn't have to be a trade-off everywhere. There may be, there's work that we can all do to try and engender, persuade, nurture the government commitment and the commitment of political leaders. And there, I'd like, again, turn to the panelists and talk about and ask them their perspectives from their own experience of how that can happen. So think of it as the first round being about, getting a sense of what the trade-off is, what are the dimensions. The second is about how can we actually minimize the trade-off. So with that, let me quickly introduce the panelists. First, thank you all for joining us in this important discussion. To my immediate left is Rachel Glenister, President of the Center for Global Development. Next is Melinda Bohannon, Director General at the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, Director General for Global Issues. Next is Usman Dion, who, as I was saying, is the Vice President, our regional Vice President for, just another region, Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Then we have Dr. Eric Kwa, who's the Secretary of the Ministry of Justice of Papua New Guinea. Then we have DG Salaman Umar, Director General at Somalia's Ministry of Finance. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Minister Salim Vala, Minister of Planning and Development for Mozambique. Between them, they have remarkable range of perspectives. We've kind of, as I was saying to all of them just before, we've kind of organized a little bit with the international partners and then the government partners, and you will see that in the sequence in which I will ask the questions. So I'm grateful to you all for being here and giving us the time and sharing your thoughts. So with that, let's get started. So the first round, and then we'll go in this order. I'll ask Rachel to first give her perspectives, but this is a set of questions for all of you. And so don't feel, so react, I hope, in a way that is most meaningful to you. So the first set of questions is really about confronting this trade-off that I mentioned. And let me put it very starkly. Should development financing be directed to where the needs are greatest, or to where there is greater government commitment, which we would argue is a prerequisite for that financing to translate into more durable and sustainable impact? There will be a trade-off, as I said, because there will be instances where the needs are huge, the suffering is great, but the government commitment is lacking. So is this trade-off empirically relevant? Is it useful as a guiding principle? What's the appropriate balance? As I said, there's no right answer. What are the pros and cons from your view of let's call it a more commitment-based approach to development financing or a more needs-based approach? So just reactions to this broad kind of thing. How do we think about this trade-off? Rachel.
Thank you.
And one other thing, if I may. Okay. I will also try to be disciplined with each of you so we get through the 2 rounds. So please forgive me if I give you a little nudge.
Okay, no worries. So this is a very uncomfortable trade-off that you've raised, but I think it's critical that the World Bank does take into account commitment, government commitment, not just needs, in deciding its resources. And I go a bit further than you have in saying it's not just about the durability of the impact that comes from government commitment, but also the magnitude of the impact. So let me take three areas where I think government commitment is really important. The first is a commitment to peace and stability, and that we need that peace and stability for firms and individuals to make investments. And actually, when you're coming out of conflict, there are a huge number of very productive investments that can be made. And we've seen actually that some of the highest growth countries are those coming out of conflict, but only where there is that kind of commitment to stability. And I think agriculture is a really good example of this. There's a lot of evidence that farmers will only invest in their land if they feel they have some security over it. So I've seen this personally in Mozambique where I worked, and also Sierra Leone. In both cases, you had countries coming out of conflict, high growth rates because of commitment from governments. The second area is commitment to spending resources well. And we know that really good programs generate 10 or even 100 times more impact per dollar spent than even good programs. So, that means that you're going to get a lot more impact if the bank focuses more of its resources on countries that are willing to commit to high impact policies. And the third is a commitment to the enabling environment that you need for economic output. And let me give the example of refugees, which I know you've heard me bang on about before. But here, at the moment, the humanitarian system provides more resources to those places where refugees are in camps. And it looks like very high need. You get all these pictures of very high need kids in camps. But actually, refugees and communities around them are much better off if you integrate refugees into the community by allowing them to work. And at the moment, we've done some analysis at CGD that shows that even though the bank is going in the right direction, you are still getting more resources going to countries that are least good at integrating refugees into the economy. So I really urge you to go further in putting resources where they're going to have the biggest impact.
Thank you. Belinda.
Thank you. So I'd start, well, as Rachel did, by acknowledging that the trade-off is real and uncomfortable. But I would take us back actually a few decades to when we first started looking at the right formula for allocating development finance, because in the 2000s, we were all working with an equation which looked both at need, but also at the CPIA, the country, I think there's basically a measure of country institutional capability to deliver on policy. Now, clearly need is paramount, and we should always think about that first and foremost. But the problem with the second part of the equation is that it was static. It was really hard to assess properly what a country's capability was with a backward look. And it was really hard to assess commitment simply by looking at institutional capability, how correlated the two were. So this is the crux of the issue, is how do you think about capability and commitment in a way that is a meaningful proxy for thinking about how well resources are going to be spent. And I would concur with Rachel. I think there are two features that we need to be very careful of. One is it's not binary, right? A government is a multifaceted institution with reform partners and detractors. So understanding how development finance and development actors interact with that to strengthen the hand of the reformers is key, and how decisions that you make about the quantum of finance and how you spend that finance with respect to that dynamic is really important. So there is always agency. But secondly, thinking about how do you measure commitment in a global context, which gives you a sort of safe handrail to make global decisions? The answer is it's very hard. It's very country by country specific. We've all worked in contexts where there is always a way forward. There is always a prospect of a reform or a brighter upside or something that government could do differently just with a little bit more help. So fundamentally, it's about partnership and staying the course. The decision to walk away must never be taken lightheartedly, never on the basis of a formula alone. It has to be a consensual decision where it actually, you judge on balance, it makes things worse by putting resources through the government. So partnership is important. Thinking about this in a non-linear sense is really important, and really thinking about how you understand the country by country context.
Thank you. Usman.
I do agree with two speakers. It is an uncomfortable question, but it is, I think, a realistic question to ask, especially nowadays, because of a number of challenges we see happening around the world. The reality is you don't need necessarily to choose one or the other, but perhaps to look at how to accommodate the two within the context and the reality on the ground you're facing. And this is where it becomes extremely important when you ask that question, where really commitment is calibrated with the rest. It is very easy to do. Frankly, this is not where the challenge is. Where the challenge is sometimes where you have huge need and there is no commitment, or the commitment is weak. And what do you do? And frankly speaking, pulling out, okay, disengaging, which we have seen in some cases, or the stop and go doesn't work. Because by the time you come back, it has changed so much. That vacuum created can be filled by others, which can create a whole set of issues that it is always better to remain engaged. Now, what remaining engaged on that context mean? This is where understanding the political economy is fundamentally important. This is also where asking the right question. Why do we remain engaged? How, for example, to save human capital? How currently to make sure that institutions continue to deliver? How to make sure that this services delivery is being sustained to respond, to the need of the most needed. Those are the fundamental questions associated with then, the trade-off you're talking to. And then a key question is, how do you go about it if disengagement, if pulling out is not, the question, is not the response? And sometimes, perhaps it is better than to look at it in a very realistic way. What can be done? Because sometimes those challenges can also create opportunities. Opportunities in the way that perhaps because resources are no longer there or resources are a constraint. Opportunities because institutions need to be supported and services delivery need to be provided to find much more innovative ways, of working towards, that difficult trade-off which is necessary, to be made. A couple of examples just. We in the context, for example, of Ethiopia, the most difficult reform happened in the middle of the civil war. The telecom reform, which nobody wanted to talk about. The banking sector reform, okay? If you take other countries like Lebanon, it is a classical case where currently we have been able to push our engagement was related to reform which we were able currently to make our counterpart understand because they will not have the resources, but because also there is a trust and commitment together, we will be able to advance those agendas. So ultimately, trade-off is fundamentally important. It will also bring it to the issue of selectivity. How to be selective on the way you have to achieve impact on the ground, how that selectivity can support institution, but at the same time, how to make sure that it is being owned. And this is where, the notion of trust becomes fundamentally important.
Thank you, Usman. I have to say, all of you have been super about sticking and even being below the time that we had allocated. So I'm bursting with questions, follow-up questions that I wanted to ask each of you, but I'm going to postpone it. I'm going to curb that impulse. And let's turn it over now to our government partners, starting with you, Dr. Kwa. Reactions to what you've heard. We will come back to you on, how I know that you've actually dealt with this issue on the ground, but just at a slightly more conceptual level, thinking globally, thinking about, how do we as international partners think about where to direct our finance? What's your sense of this trade-off?
Thank you. First of all, let me say that when you look at us, don't look at us as statistics. We're real people, and we've got real people on the ground who are faced with a lot of other problems. I think that's the first perspective that we need to put in place in terms of how development partners look at countries like us. When we are deliberating on these two questions, for us in Papua New Guinea, it's both. Because I can assure all of us that the government has been very committed to addressing lawlessness and violence in the last 80 years, consistently. Unfortunately, we can never reduce law and order problems in a manner of years. It takes time. And so there's also the need that always confronts us almost every day as we are deliberating on budget and resource allocation. All right, we need to deal with fragility, conflict, and violence. But what about poverty? What about corruption? What about basic health services? What about infrastructure? What about improving our agriculture? How about dealing with the huge unemployed youth population? So for us, it's a myriad of challenges we need to look at. And from our perspective, this is where development partners need to be a bit more smart, a bit more strategic in terms of interventions. It's always good to add value to what we already have, what we're already doing, what can then be added on to achieve the results that we all want in this space. In the job that I've been there for 8 years. My position has been that there shouldn't be any parallel systems. Don't come and deliver your programs based on your design. Talk to me first. Let's work together as friends, because we are aiming for the same outcome for the good of our people. And so it's always about partnership. And that partnership comes with trust. And trust comes with respect. It's not a size, it's not a location. You're dealing with a people in a geographical location called a country. And so if we are able to appreciate that, then we will be able to overcome a lot of these challenges that we face on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this struck me. You talked about partnerships. Usman just talked about trust. And yes, that's the starting point. DG Salaman, your thoughts?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to commend the support provided by the international community to our country and to our people. We are very grateful for that support. However, if we get into the point that the argument of the trade-off between the need-based with the long-term strategy and vision, for us in Somalia case, this is not something abstract. It is a daily routine thing that we are facing day in, day out. And Somalia is simultaneously managing the acute humanitarian crisis, as well as the security threat from the terrorist organizations who are in combat with the government at the same time, and also for looking and commit the state building for the long-run vision. So for our case, I would say we would have balanced approach. For Somalia, like, the challenging environments like Somalia case, it requires that to have a combination of strategic continuity, stakeholder engagement, as well as the adaptive management. So for combining those three elements, it is what makes us at least to benefit the support is that given to Somalia by the international community. One thing that I would like to mention is that in our case, Somalia case, that the government at the time that the country was in a HIPIC program, and at that time we faced the simultaneously crisis, like the COVID-19 shock, COVID-19 pandemic, climate shock, as well as the combat with the terrorist group who were in control of the part of the country. So at that time also, the vision of even reaching the completion point and rid of the debt burden that the country has, it required a government decision and the forward looking, and also to balance the current situation that we are dealing with, also looking forward how we can build a state. At the top of that, we had a political issue when, this election model is not agreeable by opposition and the government. It's also contributed the burden that the government is facing. So the trade-off at that time, I can say, it was that program was not even derailed by those challenges. The government was committed at least to take that program forward, regardless of who is in control, regardless of who is present, with the support of the international community, especially the World Bank, African Development Bank, and also partners and donors. So even though we had challenges after challenges, but at the same time, if I take you back in our situation, Somalia has been in a conflict for almost 3 decades and plus. Our people, 73% of our population are young people, less than around 10 years old. Most of them, they born at the time of conflict. They grow up in an environment where people took law and order with their hands. And then that kind of scenario still remains in their mind. So convincing them that there is an alternative way of living, and also your future is not also linked to your past situation, it's not that easy. So get them their mindset and focus it on the forward looking for their future building was not that easy, but I would say that at least if the partners, instead of setting up a parallel kind of systems, working with the government and at least use the system in place, hopefully I think it would be the best model that will bear fruit and at least address the acute challenges that the governments are facing.
Thank you. And actually, we will come back to this. You've already started to get into the second thing, which, what are the specific ways in which we can partner together so that there isn't this trade-off. So we build on government commitment. But Minister Vala, we'd like to hear from you on this, at this level, this broad question about how, as international partners, we should approach the trade-off between where there's need, say in one country, versus where there is commitment. Excuse me, 1 minute, Ms. Ravala. I believe the interpreter cannot hear it. We just want to make sure that the interpreter can hear so that they can translate for us. Just give us 1 minute. Minister, could you say something? Can I ask, can the interpreter hear me? So then let's just switch mics. One more try.
Ok. Não, estava dizendo que esta é uma aparente tensão e não uma tensão real ou efetiva. Por quê? Porque se o processo de planificação é feito de forma realística, de forma efetiva, há uma congruência entre aquilo que é o compromisso governamental assumido e aquilo que são as necessidades enfrentadas, sentidas pela população. Então, o ideal é haver esta aproximação, evitando assimetrias entre estes dois hiatos aparentes, permitindo que o quê? Que tudo o que são os compromissos assumidos politicamente, compromissos governamentais, baseiam-se naquilo que são as necessidades reais da população, dos vários grupos existentes. E também outro elemento importante é que o desenvolvimento, de forma geral, é um jogo de responsabilidades partilhadas. Se nós quisermos fazer este jogo, o governo, a sociedade civil, o setor privado, as instituições de formação, de forma não integrada, os seus resultados, os seus impactos, a sustentabilidade também poderá ser posta em causa. Então, a nossa visão aqui é que nós temos que procurar, através de um exercício de planificação, através de uma liderança efetiva e uma boa apropriação dos processos pelos atores, fazer com que os vários intervenientes, incluindo as instituições financeiras, possam estar em convergência com aquilo que são os grandes objetivos da nação, os grandes objetivos do país. O nosso presidente, o presidente Daniel Chapo, disse aqui na abertura, há alguns grandes desafios que nós temos em Moçambique. O terrorismo em Cabo Delgado provoca instabilidade, as mudanças climáticas que ciclicamente trazem movimentações, levam as populações para a pobreza. Temos também o problema de que Moçambique ainda exporta muitas matérias-primas. E os preços das matérias-primas no mercado internacional é muito volátil. Então, queremos mudar esta abordagem. Esses são alguns dos grandes gargalos. O que tem feito com que, vamos lá, de 2015 para trás, nós tínhamos uma taxa de crescimento de 7,5% em média durante 15, 20 anos. A partir de 2016, por causa destes choques internos e externos, temos estado numa média de 3% a taxa de crescimento. Praticamente houve uma redução, mais do que a metade da taxa de crescimento. Nós temos cerca de 80% da população moçambicana tem menos de 35 anos. 65% da população de Moçambique vive nas áreas rurais, depende da agricultura de baixa produtividade. A taxa de desemprego, neste momento, ronda os 18,4%. As pequenas e médias empresas em Moçambique são acima de 95%. Então, só pegando nesses indicadores, isto dá uma indicação de quais são as grandes necessidades, mas também quais são os grandes compromissos, que isto não pode estar desalinhado. E, portanto, a nossa visão é que nós temos que aproximar-nos mais. Não é só o Estado, o governo, com os parceiros, com as instituições financeiras, mas também com o setor privado, com a sociedade civil, não é? Haver esta comunhão de propósitos, e nós temos uma estratégia nacional de desenvolvimento no nosso país que aprovamos pelo Parlamento no ano passado, com uma vigência de 20 anos, 2025, 2044, que define a grande visão, os objetivos estratégicos, as prioridades da nação, e todos os atores deverão trabalhar para a convergência e implementação desta agenda com um bom e robusto sistema de monitoria e avaliação. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Minister. So I think this actually gives us a good opportunity now to pivot to the second round of questions. All of you have started to allude to that already.
Recording in progress.
Dealt with this challenge of building commitment, consensus. Let me start with you, Digi Solomon. You mentioned, the lead up to the HIPAC, getting to Somalia to the HIPAC at a time of some political change. And so, can you unpack that a bit more in terms of what it took on the ground? Because if you allow me to be frank, I'm sure that not everyone in government, nor everyone within political elites agreed. Otherwise, it would have been a simple exercise. And I'll also be frank in saying what I've heard, what the team has said, is that it took individual champions of reform, such as yourself, to kind of make the case for the ground. And that's true in almost every country, that politically tough decisions are not easy. So can you unpack that? How did you build the commitment to deal with the political transition?
Thank you very much. It's a great question. So for the time that the country was in the HIPIC cycle, it took us almost close to 10 years to reach the completion point. By the time that we reach the decision point, it is a game changer. So before that, there was from the scratch, kind of the reforms, starting the public financial management reforms, capacity building for government institutions, and at least the country is in a political fragmentation because we have a federal system of the government where still the functional assignment between the federal and the federal member state were not, defined. So convincing even some of the colleagues, politicians from the various parties, as well as the wider community, that Somalia is going to maintain reforms at the challenging time of the political fragmentation was not an easy. However, we try to convince the head of the government at least to delink the politics from the reform agenda that we are aiming to achieve down the road. I remember times that we convinced in the mindset of our leaders that this is for their legacy, at least in the future, to delink the policy with the reforms. It was times that even our parliamentarian members try to reach out international community and saying that maybe what the government is doing is not right. And some of the community, even leaders, were in doubt that maybe it is a kind of pep dream reaching the completion point at the stage of political fragmentation, economic challenges, and shocks after shocks. Fortunately, we come up as a team to stood up firm and get the forward looking all the time, having a commitment if by every other weeks and 2 weeks have a meeting and just measure the steps that we have taken where we are heading to. And also with the support at that time from the international community, it was huge, remarkable. There was no single benchmark that the Somalia missed, even more than, I remember, 100 plus benchmarks that we have been doing. And also there was a mission, every maybe twice a year, a mission that reviewing if the program is still on track. So there was no single benchmark. I think one time we took a waiver for one of the benchmarks that we might not meet on time because of the political situation. One of the federal member states said that we are not working or cooperating with the government on that specific. But it was a time, at the time also, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes by the time we are reaching the decision point, it was a COVID-19 pandemic time. It was first time that we had a discussion of the, at least with the Paris Club, on virtual meeting. It took us 9 hours convincing some of our creators at least to come up a consensus and reach an agreement with them. It was not an easy task, but fortunately, the two head of the state, is the incumbent one and the previous one, were committed at least to that. I remember one time, let me give you one example. The incumbent president has been, he was elected on May 15, 2022. In 2 days, he made a commitment with the World Bank and IMF on 17 and on 18 of May, that specific time after he sworn it in as a president, to show the international community that the Somali government is committed to do the job and not derailing the program. On 27th of May, he made a written commitment with the international community. So it was a long journey for us tackling and intervening the acute problems and keeping in-house many political issues, as well as balancing the long-term vision at least, and get the country forward.
Thank you. So Dr. Kwa, I'm going to ask you a similar question, which is, you've really spearheaded a lot of the efforts, and especially I know in terms of the national prevention strategy, you've talked about the ongoing commitment, but surely it has not been that everyone has agreed with you, especially the politicians. So what was your hardest kind of case where you had to really convince the political leaders that something needed to be done?
The hardest part was to get the parliament to pass the law on the Independent Commission Against Corruption in 2020. It took us 2 years to negotiate with the politicians to agree that we needed an anti-corruption agency in Papua New Guinea. On the day that the law was passed, the government split into two. And we almost had the government collapse, but thank God it didn't. The government survived. And we are really happy that the ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, is now up and running. And we're hoping that this particular institution will help us fight corruption in Papua New Guinea. Now, when I look at the fragility map, you will find that from the continents, there is a finger pointing to the South Pacific, and that finger is pointing on Papua New Guinea. So when you look at Papua New Guinea and the fragility map, we seem to be out of place in the map. Because we just celebrated 50 years of our democracy last year, consistent constitutional democracy, for 50 years. The country is largely peaceful. And so you begin to ask, so why is Papua New Guinea on the list? Well, because we have a major issue in relation to dealing with violence. And that violence is basically intra. It's between tribal groups. We have tribal fights. And so Papua New Guinea has a population of 11 million. And we hold the world's largest languages. We've got 830 different languages. So you're talking about 830 different tribes, all united together in one nation. And you're going to manage that group of people. And so obviously there'll be conflicts. There'll be problems. But as a nation, we have survived for the last 50 years. And so the main challenge I have is that I look after the law and justice sector, and that covers 15 different agencies, including police, including the judiciary, and of course, we just mentioned ICAC, and a couple of other agencies. And our role is basically to monitor and to assist each other in terms of dealing with lawlessness in Papua New Guinea. And so as a unit, we have existed as a system for the last 23 years. And together as a single unit of institutions, we try to support each other to ensuring that we give the best we can to ensure that our country continues to exist as a peaceful nation. At the forefront of these 10 or 11 million people, right in the rural communities, because as we've heard from Mozambique and elsewhere, we've got 85% of our people are rural. And so obviously they will be mostly in the rural areas. It's a small island nation, very many islands, people living on the islands. And so we need to reach those people. And a lot of times it's very difficult to reach people in those remote areas. And so prior to independence, we set up a system called the village court system, where we've got, at the moment, almost 20,000 local people who actually mediate disputes within the villages using custom. And we, as a nation, we believe that this network of village court officials, they're the ones that keep a lot of the peace in Papua New Guinea. Because our police numbers are not much. The court system is not really strong. And so if this system did not exist, then we would probably have a lot more problems than we have today. Because they use traditional methods to resolve disputes. It has worked for the last 50 years. And they're doing it on a voluntary basis. And fortunately for me, that they report to my office. So we have administrative control over these village court officials. We're basically village men and women. And they sit in and resolve disputes on a daily basis. Now, the other example that I want to give, and that's something that we're working on at the moment, is in relation to the sector policy. Now, I've been a teacher of law. I've been in the government system for the last 15 years. I've written law books, we've written laws. It's come to my mind that it doesn't work. There must be another way. And so in the new law and justice sector policy, we've decided to focus on crime prevention, because we don't have the capacity to deal with all the problems in Papua New Guinea. And we think that maybe we should redirect our focus to areas that will reduce violence, that will reduce crime. And so we think that the best hope that we have is on the land. Focus on agriculture, because 95% of the land in Papua New Guinea is owned by the people themselves. The state only owns 5%. And these are mostly in the urban areas. And so if we can invest in the rural communities through agriculture, that might help. Because, you know, a young kid that leaves school goes back to the land. He doesn't migrate to town unless he has relatives. But the land is lying idle. they need help to transform that land into a marketable asset. So that's just one example that we can give. But we have tasked the government, please focus more on non-crime activities. Can you channel resources to other areas? Because when you're dealing with the criminal justice system, we're a very few number of people, but we as a system can chew up a lot of money because court systems, they need money, police, the corrections. But maybe if we spend more money in terms of prevention areas, then it will help. And I think that's where I think the development partners, if they want to come to Papua New Guinea, look into these other areas. Yes, we know that you want to help us to focus on the criminal process. But maybe in 50 years, we have learned we can't reduce those problems. Maybe take a different approach.
Thank you.
That will help.
Thank you, Dr. Kwa. I think that resonates also with what we heard this morning quite a bit. It becomes a lot more expensive after you've got the problem. Better to kind of intervene sooner. So, Minister Vala, I'm going to turn to you to just, in very practical terms, and perhaps a bit more kind of to the extent that you're able to speak frankly on this, where do you see the most politically contentious kind of choices that confront the government as you meet the challenges of youth unemployment, as the extremist violence up in Cabo Delgado, etc. You've got fiscal challenges as well, which are going to require some hard choices. I think President Chapo's commitment was very clear. Anything you can share about the thinking about how the government under his leadership will tackle these challenges?
Obrigado.
Thank you very much.
É uma questão complexa.
It's a very complex question.
Alguns aspectos que
Some aspects
era bom partilhar.
that I think would be useful to share with this audience.
E alguns desses foram aqui aflorados.
Some of those aspects were already discussed this morning.
A questão do emprego,
The question of employment,
a diversificação econômica,
economic
e a
diversification,
transformação da estrutura
and the transformation of the structure of our economy and other African economies. We have to tackle this structural transformation. We do have several challenges that we have to put in our agenda for debate. One of the challenges in Mozambique, for instance, after the war, we implemented several mega projects to exploit natural resources with the support of partners. After 25 years, we realized that poverty did not decrease as we desired. 51% in terms of consumption only. Inequalities are very slow to disappear. In urban areas, they increase. In the rural areas, they are decreasing or maintaining the same level. Per capita income is not coming up. It's below $150 per capita income. This makes us think that there's something that are development signals that cannot rely on the exploitation of natural resources. That's why our president spoke about diversification and its importance. The majority of the poor families in Mozambique use fishing, agriculture, and small business activities. If we manage to increase the income and the productivity among those households, which is about 25 million families of the 35 million. Development will increase, and the Human Development Index will increase as well. The expansion of health and education services is there, but income is still the same. So we need to implement a two-way strategy. On the one hand, the big projects in the energy and agribusiness and industry, but we also have to look into the small businesses among poor households. And we have to look at 4 points: access to education, quality and relevant education, financing for the small enterprises, access to markets, information on markets and prices, and infrastructure to support small businesses. And the fourth way of access to technology. Here in the United States, there's a big boom in the development of technology. The majority of the biggest companies is linked to technology. We visited China and South Korea and saw how development is growing from technology. That the same thing can happen in Mozambique. Thank you. Muito obrigada.
Let me now turn back to Usman, Melinda, Rachel. Maybe we'll go reverse order. Just ask you some reactions here. Some of the things we heard about trust, avoid parallel systems, go with, commitment. Any reactions? What can we as international partners do better?
I do like what I have heard from all the three. Starting with when Dr. Kwa said, when you come to my country to help, talk to me. Talk to me first, if really you want to help. And I think that is a fundamentally important message, that at the heart of what we are doing, the client comes first, not the instrument. It is the client. The moment you have that capacity to be engaged, to listen, and to listen constructively, I think there is a possibility to show also genuineness on the way we can work together. And I think that is absolutely important. And this is where I do see sometimes, the role of institutions like ours, and the way we can partner in a much more clear way with our client countries, especially in FCV's context. Because it has a multi-dimension on the way we are looking at this. It is a complex environment. The politics can be as complicated as ever. But most importantly, if you want to succeed, you need also to build somehow coalition. And that coalition has to be owned. And that ownership is fundamentally by those who are the decision makers in the country. And this is absolutely crucial. That is why I do believe also on the work we are doing, providing the backbone analytical work is extremely important. The financing framework is important, but above all, how to create a convening platform where there is consistency and there is coherence on the way things are being done. Well, if we do it that way, this is where trust and mutual accountability is going to come in. Trust because people will know you're genuine. Trust because they know you are listening. But also accountability in the sense that they know that they can't do it alone. You can't do it alone, but mutually based on respect, based on what we commit, we will be able to make it. And we have seen a number of cases where this accountability on building coalition somehow have really led to positive outcomes. Take Lebanon. To start with Lebanon, the $1 billion+ we have in Lebanon currently through the LEAP, the Lebanon Emergency Assistance Project, is not only a framework, it is not just a lending instrument, but it is a platform where currently development partners come together, work with the government on the way they can look at currently reconstruction. Take the case of Syria. We started with a damage need assessment where we were able then, to share it with development partners and to make sure it is a framework but owned by the government. And that is currently what is driving our program. The Multi-Donors Trust Fund in Syria, where a number of partners, including some sitting in this room, are part of, have been some of those instruments where we build coalition on the way we can engage with Yemen, not only the authorities, but also civil society, private sector, in order to create a framework where everyone will be able to contribute and to push meaningfully a positive agenda. And I think that is that sense of how we build those platforms, which are absolutely crucial. But then the last point, Shubham, very quickly, is we need to be clear on the division of labor.
Yes.
Who's doing what? And who has accountability of what? And then we need also to work within a clear time frame, because time is also the essence when you work on FCV context. Also, it is difficult, but result cannot be done without having a clear time frame for achievement.
Sense of urgency, absolutely. But with strategic patience as well. 10 years sometimes. Melinda.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I think we heard really 3 very convincing articulated stories about why the partnership principle matters as the primary principle, and why conditionality doesn't work. I think if we've learnt anything really over the last 10, 20, 30 years in development practice, it's this notion that we can tell as the donors or external partners what the right or wrong thing to do is. I don't think we can. I don't think we understand enough externally as to what really constitutes deep reform. And the nuance that was articulated in all 3 examples, I think, spells out in a very crystal clear way why it is so essential to work in partnership with the governments that are doing them. There's no way with information asymmetry you can make a accurate, specific, true judgment about what's really going on beneath the bonnet of a government reform agenda. The people that do know are the people delivering that. Now, it's still, I suppose, the contract with the World Bank or with bilateral donors always has to keep in mind that there are other actors that are questioning what the judgment about staying engaged is. For us in the UK, it's our parliament. For many other bilateral donors, it's the same. For the World Bank, it's the board. So you have to be able to articulate very clearly what the expectations are, the delivery, the progress, because at the end of the day, you're investing taxpayers' money. But I think where we've been really successful, I hope, is the UK is moving a lot more towards understanding the principle of partnership in a much more mature way. Our recent Global Partnerships Conference was designed with exactly that in mind. For what it's worth, the notion that partnership, expertise exchange, working with local organizations is one of the most helpful things you can do. If you're really thinking about supporting the government's reform agenda over the medium term. So I would say that really the principle, conditionality doesn't work, but alignment behind shared objectives does. And then you need strategic patience and a sharp eye for understanding what it is you can do, and very clear conversations or trigger points for where something is not working and you think you either need to change course or withdraw for a certain time or whatever it might be. And I think some of the agreements that we're beginning to put in practice now, again, very context specific, very country specific, whether it is with Mozambique or Somalia or with some of our partners in sub-Saharan Africa, are exactly that. They are a medium-term commitment to raise finance, but coming in behind the government's reform agenda and doing what we can to support that reform agenda. That's really the way to think about it.
Thank you. Rachel.
Thanks. So I think it's quite hard as an external actor to build commitment and, you know, help get involved in the politics of generating that kind of, you know, the commitment that we were talking about in the first half. But I think it's completely possible to come in behind people. I mean, I think very much back to my time working on Mozambique long ago, and the Minister of Finance, Luisa Diogo, and I was in a meeting with her where she absolutely ripped to shreds the governor of the central bank for daring to, you know, be pushing a line that she felt would lead to inflation. Don't you understand that inflation hurts the poor most? And I mean, I was on the IMF team at the time, and, you know, we just sat there, and I mean, what we had to say had nothing compared to what the finance minister was saying. And so, you know, we just sort of supported this extremely good program. Indeed, we even encouraged Mozambique to spend more money and put less in reserves at the time, because we thought their commitment to strong financial policies were so good. And as you say, the growth rate during that period was very high. So that was just an example of, you know, come in behind a government that's doing all the right things, but you're not building it yourself. The second example that I would think about is my time working on Sierra Leone immediately after the end of a devastating 10-year civil war. And there I was working not at the World Bank, but in partnership with the World Bank. And the government took a very brave commitment, which was to decentralize power to districts in order to achieve stability and peace. And they were giving up, essentially, they'd won the election, but they were voluntarily giving up some power to the opposition because they knew the opposition would win in some of the districts. So that was their decision to make that, to push for that. And it did indeed really help with stability that the opposition parties had control in some areas and elections weren't 0-1 because both sides had some power all of the time. But to pull off decentralization is an extremely difficult technical and resource-intensive process. So then the donors came in behind that and provided an awful lot of advice about, well, how do you do decentralization? So it wasn't just, you've got the plan, we give you the money. It was more of a partnership in terms of designing that, but under a very strong commitment that showed a real political commitment in terms of giving up some power, right? That's sort of as strong as you can get. So I think those are, you know, those are the two examples that have stuck with me. And I compare that to my time working on Pakistan, where there's been a lot less government commitment to doing the underlying reforms that are needed to really get the economy going. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, you know, we're running a bit late, so just a warning, I think we will probably go over by about 5 minutes, maybe max 10 minutes. I hope you will all bear with us till our next engagement. But we will also have to cut back on the questions time a bit. Let's begin with questions in the room, and then I think we have a couple of questions from online. Yes, please come up to the mic. if there's particular person you'd like to direct your question to or Jenna, but just please be brief.
Yeah, sure. Clinton from World Vision International. Dr. Kwa, thank you so much for your comment about Papua New Guinea. I had the privilege of working in PNG on the Productive Partnerships for Agriculture project in Bougainville. And also in Madang. And the one really great thing we saw was, supporting cocoa farmers, particularly in Bougainville in the north and the south and Arawa, who used to fight with each other. But the moment we brought in cocoa as a kind of something that they shared and had in common, all of a sudden these two groups were like, oh, actually we have this thing in common. Let's work together. And it ended up creating an environment for peace. And that was funded by the World Bank. And the reason I bring that up as an example is one word I feel is missing from this dialogue is peace. And something that is in common with both Papua New Guinea, Somalia, and Mozambique is a desire for peace. And I'm just wondering, what is the role of peace in this conversation? What is the role of peace when it comes to the FCV strategy and the investment in, these contexts? How do we bring about peace? So, Dr. Kwa, in Papua New Guinea, what does it look like for you as the secretary, but particularly your ministry that works on justice and law, to bring about peace? How do you see that in PNG? And then for the World Bank and your investments through the FCV strategy, what does it look like to invest in peace, to bring about an enabling environment for these investments to thrive and succeed?
Thank you. Another question here, please. And please introduce yourself as well.
Okay, Adeolu Adewumi, an international advisor on human security and accountable leadership. I hear so much about commitment. What exactly, in practical terms, are we talking about in terms of government commitment? Please, this question goes, I'm happy that you were in Africa before you transitioned back to the HQ. What exactly are we talking about in terms of this commitment in relation to credit that is provided to government that borrow from the World Bank? And yes, they are credit worthy, and at the same time, income is also guaranteed. But over time, you discover that what you give, you don't see the impact on ground. So how do we reconcile that? And are there safeguards within the system as the World Bank to ensure that in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, the funding that you are providing is actually in tandem with impact on ground?
Thank you. And that's exactly the theory of change for what we're saying. I think I started off by, right? So we will come to that. Online, I think this is, again, not so much how do you define government commitment, but how do you generate political commitment, especially when it's a controversial issue or one that there may not be a consensus on domestically or among different parts of the political establishment. And how can you I think, Minister Vala, you addressed some of this already. What role do governments play in shaping public perceptions of what the priorities should be, right, for a government? And how do you do this without, in a credible way, right? As opposed to this is credible in two senses, both in terms of the priorities, but also in terms of that this is not somehow part of a, benefiting only some people within the larger country. So look, I'll open it up to whoever wants. These questions are pretty deep about, we haven't talked peace. I'm happy to come in as well because some of this was directed at what we've been doing. But please, any one of you who would like to respond to any of the questions. Peace, Dr. Kwa. Yes.
That's the question. Thank you. Just my own definition of justice is peace. And peace in families, peace in communities. And so all our programs must lead to peace. And peace means resolving disputes, conflicts as quickly as we can to maintain peace within those communities. So that's my response to the issue of peace. That's why we invest a lot of time and effort with our village court system. We encourage them to attend to disputes as quickly as possible and to reduce any potential for conflicts. So that's our strategy. Now, in relation to the other question about commitment, from where I sit as a government officer, when we commit, that means that the government commits the whole agency of state to support a particular program. And so, for example, Papua New Guinea has finally signed on to the fragility program last year. And so we've now signed on the National Prevention Strategy with the World Bank. And the direction from the government, all your agencies who are working with the World Bank in the various programs, realign, readjust, reset to addressing the issue of fragility and violence. So that is the commitment that we have made as a government. That we're not just talking about the funding that is coming, but we're also committing ourselves as a state to the process.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to take on?
Esta questão
This issue
da paz
of peace,
é uma questão central.
it is a crucial issue in countries
Como o nosso, né?
such as ours.
No ano passado,
Mozambique
completou
last
50
year
anos de independência.
had its 50th independence anniversary, and a significant part of these 50 years of independence
Viveu em situações de conflitualidade.
were lived in conflict
Isso é muito
situations.
complicado. Eu
And
penso
this is
que,
very challenging. Therefore,
ao nível do governo,
at the government level,
o presidente Chapo não hesitou
the
com uma
president
agenda muito
himself
apertada de estar aqui
did
para
not
discutir esse
hesitate
assunto.
in come here to discuss this issue, fragility, conflict, violence, because Mozambique knows this firsthand.
Vivenciada mesmo. Mas nós temos uma abordagem
But
sobre esta questão.
we have a vision
Não é
of
algo
what
que é muito
peace
puro de
means.
Há-
And
há-
it's
há um
not
livro
something
muito interessante
very
do professor
clear in
Amartya Sen.
Mozambique. Professor
de
Martia Sen has a book that talks about the
essa é uma
concept of
abordagem,
justice.
quer dizer, que
This is
justiça
an
é muito
idea
mais
that
do que aquilo que os
justice
tribunais
goes
fazem.
beyond the
Como
court
é que isso
systems.
pode
How can this
permear toda a sociedade?
permeate
E tem
the
a ver com
society
paz.
as a whole, and
E o que nós
how do
temos estado
we
a fazer,
create this peace?
mesmo no
And what
conflito
we've been doing, even in
Cabo Delgado, terrorismo,
the situation of Cabo
Delgado,
Delgado with
que
terrorist
não podemos
roots
só enfrentar
is that
o
we
problema
cannot
da
just
conflitualidade
talk about the
com
conflict
soluções
problem
militares,
with
armadas.
military armed solutions
Defesa, reforço da defesa, da
to
segurança.
strengthen defense and security. This is, of course, important, but we need to recall a message that John Paul II had already transmitted. In countries that come out of conflict situations, the new name of peace is called
Para
development.
eliminar as raízes
To eliminate
dos conflitos,
the conflict roots, at times we have to go towards solutions based on development. That's why we're so sympathetic with the idea of the state of development that promotes the market economy, but that it has a state that legitimates the capacity of well-being, poverty alleviation, and to develop the human capital in the country. This is a concept that we are in favor of. We want to consolidate peace through development, well-being, and prosperity of families. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. That's why we're not talking about, you didn't hear peace everywhere, but it's implicit in everything. That everything that we're doing when we talk about jobs, that's part of the theory of change. that these are all should, whether justice, jobs, and obviously security in a very literal way, but justice and jobs development that's what we're striving for. One question online that came in, and Usman, maybe I'll ask you to speak briefly on it. It's a easy one. It says, why did decades of donor-driven reform efforts in Lebanon fail to prevent the current situation?
I think we can
move on.
We can move on that one because look.
No, look, this is at the core of what we're saying. That exactly. Look, despite all our efforts, fragility, conflict, and violence seem to be spreading.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and just take it from this audience. 10 years ago, if you were talking about fragility in this room, the number of people you have today and the number of people you would have had 10 years ago will be completely different, just in terms of numbers. So it tells you how the world of today is going more and more to fragility. And there are also complexities. All of you have heard, the reality of what we call VUCA, vulnerability, uncertainties, complexity, and ambiguity. And a number of countries in the world of today are going through that path. The classical case of Lebanon, for those who know Lebanon, this is a country which is small relatively in terms of geography, but extremely complicated politically, and with an extremely volatile neighborhood. So when you have the combination of very complex domestic politics, when you have a combination of very difficult economics, and you have very difficult geopolitics, the risk is even being exacerbated. And this is where the notion of leadership becomes fundamentally important. This is where having a national consensus on how politics have to be driven, how they need to be articulated, and how they need really to be based on realities which can be addressed are fundamentally important. And that is why no matter how donors can be supportive, donors alone can fix the fragility of a country. It has to come from inside. And that's the core point which Dr. Kwa was referring to, the client, how they need to own it. And that commitment, just to close on the commitment, is also how decision makers in a country come to taking the responsibility to say, the problem is ours, we need to fix it. We will be in the helm. We will be in the driver's seat, but where we do have shortcomings, where we need support, we will ask for that support. We will be cognizant of the challenges, but we are ready to work with you on the way we will be able to address it together. And for me, this is where commitment is fundamentally important when it comes to the client. Not about promising, but about acting, and acting realistically.
Thank you. I think we will now go to one last word from each of you. I actually was going to ask you a very pointed question, but I'm going to leave it a bit more open-ended. Okay? And so your takeaway from this, or what would you like our audience, both here in the room and online, to take away in terms of the topic and the sorts of things we've been discussing?
Yeah, so I want to make clear, and we've talked a lot about commitment and how things go better when you've got governments who are committed or doing the right policies, but it doesn't have to be perfect, right? In these countries, you're very rarely, and we've talked about the importance of peace, but it doesn't have to be that there's absolutely no violence, that there's, every minister is committed, that there's absolutely no corruption. We're not setting the standard right here. We're just saying that there has to be a fundamental commitment to peace, and it's obviously not entirely in a government's control what that is, but doing what they can and trying to do the best they can. It's just a mile away from, in terms of the impact that we as outsiders can have when you have that situation versus, you know, when it's okay, I kind of need your money, but not, you know, not really committed to seeing things change and taking the difficult measures that need to be taken, that everyone recognizes need to be taken. So I just want to leave with that point that we're not setting an unachievable standard here, but it does make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree with that. Slightly controversially, I really don't like the term donor because I don't think that's how we should see the thing that we're doing. I think the thing that we're doing is partnership. And I think the reason for doing that is because we want to work together for mutual resilience. And if we think about it that way, it's not a question of someone is measuring someone else's progress. It's more you're having an honest dialogue about what you want to achieve together for mutual interest, which is a different way of thinking about it. But it is, I think, more politically sustainable for many countries' debates, certainly in the UK. And I think it's more respectful. I also think it's what I've heard today.
Swan.
There are 4 factors which I believe today are intractable: security, stability, peace, and development. Those 4 currently are so interlinked in a way that engaging on the FCV setting is fundamentally important. The more we understand which are the drivers and how we can work with stakeholders on the ground to address them, the better we have a chance.
Thank you. Dr. Hua.
Thank you. Just 2 points. The first one is we're all very different. And so I hope that when we deal with each other, we do it with respect and dignity. No one size fits all. And then the second point is that we're all friends. We're all in this together. And we all want to achieve the same outcome. So always look at each other as friends and not as a development partner, say this and this and that. We're all together in the same business to help our people. Thank you.
What I would say is that the framework accountability will be the base, but at least having a coherent, coordinated approach to streamline all the activities that what we are going to do to reach out the milestone that we are aiming to achieve out of the mission or the support that we are getting from the partners as well is the main point. The second thing is that not only for the government, but also having a wider community engagement and get them on board, at least because the community is the only factor that held the government accountable. So at least they have to be engaged as well, but also whole accountable for the government, and mutual accountability will be the only boxes that you can check when you assessing and measuring the outcome of the efforts that you put to get a yield fruits.
Thank you, Minister Vala.
Sobre esta questão,
about this question, I would like to speak as the Minister of Planning and Development of Mozambique. With this debate, with this discussion for countries such as Mozambique, we have to rediscover the role of investment and of the private sector. How can we enable it for it to generate employment and wealth. This will help build peace and stability. Thank you.
So thank you all. Let me just wrap up with one closing thought from our side. Reflecting on all that was said here, as well as a couple of the questions. First, on commitment, it is one of the things we've been asked overall, but I think you heard displayed in a lot of the comments here, that you have government partners, leaders in country who are trying to do the right thing, working hard to build a consensus within their countries on critical actions that will help a country move towards peace and prosperity. It will differ from country to country. That's what we also heard. It's going to be very context appropriate. And I think the idea that there has to be mutual accountability built on trust, based on trust, okay, for the partnership. I also hate the word donor, except that in many countries I've worked in, we're not just a donor, we're seen as an ATM machine. Okay, so this is no, but that's precisely what we're trying to say, that look, ultimately we're all in it for the durable impact going back towards. So this is a conversation. I think it's never going to be linear. It has to be strategic, but we also have to be willing to at some point recognize when that commitment is not there. And it's not conditionality based. We're not going to disengage fully, but we have to recognize, because there is an opportunity cost of where our funds go. There are equally urgent needs in many fragile places. And I think that sometimes, at least when we did our own internal introspection, we kind of didn't always pay attention to that, the role of government commitment. Perhaps it was, hubris on our part, and that's what we're trying to change. But thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Obviously, the conversation will continue, and thank you all for joining us.